The Department of Public Service Regulation ensures that the public receives safe and satisfactory utility and transportation services at reasonable rates. The department regulates certain public utilities, motor carriers, railroads, and pipelines within the state. In our latest audit report of PSR's last 2 fiscal years, the department received no recommendations but did earn a qualified opinion for its 2021 financial schedules. In 2021, the department incorrectly recorded journal entries for an intangible asset. As a result, over $450,000 in expenditures were misclassified between the department's operating and intangible asset expenditures on its schedule of total expenditures. This audit report also includes additional information on recommendations made in the prior fiscal year audit of PSR and discusses the implications of those recommendations on the current audit. I'm content editor and host Eric Seidel, and I'm here with the author of the report for the Department of Public Service Regulation, Karen Simpson. Stay with us over the next few minutes as we discuss the audit on this episode of the Montana Legislative Audit Division podcast. Okay, so joining me today is the author of the report, Karen Simpson. Karen, how are you?
Hi, Eric. I'm good. How about yourself?
I'm good. I'm excited to dig into this PSR report a little bit. Maybe we can start with some background. So if we pretend for a minute that I'm a listener who doesn't know much about the function of public service regulation, just give me a little bit of information, who they are, what they do.
Public Service Regulation is a state agency within the state of Montana. They, in a nutshell, are responsible for regulating public utilities, motor carriers, railroads, and pipelines within the state. Part of their responsibility is to ensure the public receives satisfactory utility and transportation services at reasonable rates. The Public Service Regulation is overseen by the Public Service Commissioners. These individuals are elected by district throughout the state, and there are 5 commissioners who serve as the head of the department.
Okay, so the PSR provides oversight for a few things, it sounds like, but most notably, they oversee utilities and utility rates. Okay, that seems simple enough, but how about the funding? Where does this agency's funding come from?
The department receives some federal grant awards related to pipeline safety and underground natural gas storage. However, most of their funding comes from a tax on the regulated companies within the state. That tax is collected by the Department of Revenue on behalf of the Public Service Regulation, and it's recorded in a state special revenue fund.
Okay, perfect. So we know what the PSR is. We know how they're funded. Let's talk about the audit report. One of the most important things within a financial compliance audit report is what we call the auditor's opinion. So for listeners out there who may not know, what is the auditor's opinion? What does it mean, and why is it important?
In our financial compliance audit reports, the opinion is how we communicate to a reader the results of our audit work. We can issue several different types of opinions. An unmodified opinion essentially means we think a reader can trust the accuracy of the financial data. A qualified opinion means we found some issues through our work that a reader should know about and understand as they are considering the financial information presented.
Okay, great. So with that said, with this current audit, where did you land with the auditor's opinion for those 2 fiscal years that you looked at here in this current report?
In the current audit, we issued an unmodified opinion on fiscal year 2022, meaning things were good for that year. We also issued a qualified opinion on fiscal year 2021 because of 2 things readers need to know and understand. The first is that the department recorded some journal entries incorrectly related to an information systems asset. The second is that we are not able to provide assurances over the beginning fund equity balances for fiscal year 2021. Those balances carry over from fiscal year 2020, which was a part of the time period covered by our prior audit. In that prior audit, we disclaimed an opinion on those balances. At a high level, we had concerns about the integrity and competence of certain members of the Public Service Commission's management who were on staff at the time, and we were unable to obtain enough evidence to support issuing an opinion. Those individuals are no longer with the Public Service Commission.
Well, I guess that's a pretty natural segue, Karen. You brought up some of the issues there in your prior audit with PSR. If we could first just start with, what recommendations did you give in your prior audit with PSR? And then how does that affect this current audit? Why do you continue to keep an eye on those things in this current audit?
So in the last audit of the Department of Public Service Regulation, we issued 5 recommendations. We found in our current audit that 3 of those recommendations remain partially implemented while 2 have been fully implemented. The 2 fully implemented relate to complying with state law, state policy, and internal policies. Of the 3 not fully implemented, 1 related to internal controls over preparing the note disclosures. We found the department was making progress in this area and determined no further recommendation was warranted based on our current audit work. A second recommendation not fully implemented relates to internal controls over the department's funding source. This has been a recommendation in several of the department's prior audits. The department's main funding source is a tax charged to the regulated companies that is collected by Department of Revenue. As I just mentioned, we've issued several recommendations in our most recent audits that are directed at enhancing internal controls over this activity.
Okay, so there was a lot there, I think, to unpack. Can we just talk about that last recommendation that you mentioned? You said it's been brought up several times. You've also said they've made some progress. You know, one of the ways we kind of simplify this in other audit reports is we talk about this idea of what we found. So from that perspective, what did you find when you looked into this tax issue that led to the recommendation that you just explained? Can we talk about that from that perspective, maybe?
Sure, we can talk about that. In our current audit, we found the department has built up their processes over monitoring the tax assessments and collections made by Department of Revenue. We also noted that current staff are more aware of the processes used by Department of Revenue to calculate the fee than staff were in the prior audit. So those are all good forward progress steps. However, we did find a few instances where we questioned the appropriateness of some of the data inputs used to calculate the tax rates in effect during our audit period. We worked through those with the department and report out on them in the current audit report. PSR and Department of Revenue personnel met as part of the audit to discuss our concerns, and they determined their course of action would be to monitor the situation for 2 more rate cycles, and we considered that a reasonable plan of action and made no further recommendation at this time.
Okay, so forward progress is being made, it sounds like.
Yeah, so what we can see from our current audit work is that the department is taking the recommendation seriously, is more informed and aware of the procedures in place at Department of Revenue, and was able to answer our questions and took those questions seriously and has a plan of action moving forward.
Okay, perfect. So how about that last recommendation that wasn't fully implemented?
Yeah, so the last recommendation from the prior audit that we don't feel is fully implemented yet was more global in nature and related to department culture. The other recommendations that we've talked about that were made in the prior audit really spoke to there being an overarching challenge at the department and spoke to management needing to develop a plan to enhance organizational culture. We found management and the commissioners have taken steps to address this recommendation, including addressing the compliance concerns we raised in the prior audit, reworking internal policies, and establishing a new organizational structure. However, we feel more time is needed to see what impact these changes will have on their organizational culture, so we weren't able to say the recommendation is fully implemented.
Okay, so what's really key to understand is just how important those prior audit recommendations are to your current audit even, and how those prior audit recommendations affect the scope of your current audit.
Yeah, so our scope for this audit really was focused on accomplishing 2 things. The first was the work we needed to perform to issue opinions on the financial schedules, and the second really was taking a close look at what the department and commissioners had done to address the concerns raised in the prior audit.
Okay, and obviously that isn't to overlook. I probably wouldn't be doing my job very well if I didn't ask if there were new findings or new recommendations. So let's not overlook that. Was there anything new? Was there anything else?
So because we focused on the things that had been issues in prior audits and things that we had an obligation to follow up on under the auditing standards, we really weren't looking into a lot of other areas as part of the audit. So kind of the takeaway from this report is that the commission and department are making forward progress on our recommendations from the past, and under our auditing standards, we will continue to follow up on those recommendations until they are implemented.
Karen, as we close out this audit report, it is worth noting that the office is working on a performance audit on PSR PSC, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Our office is also currently performing a performance audit of the department and the Public Service Commission.
All right, so if you're a eager reader of audit reports, keep an eye out for that one in the future. Karen, it's honestly been a real pleasure recording the podcast with you. So thank you for joining me. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule and for talking to us all about your audit report, the PSR report.
Thank you. It was great to be here today and to chat with you.
All right, and that was this episode of the Legislative Audit Division podcast. As always, a reminder, you can read our reports in their full form on our website, and that is leg.mt.gov/LAD. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.